I was in the middle of a chemotherapy session when my brother emptied my savings account. Not a metaphor. Not an exaggeration. I had a needle in my arm, poison dripping into my veins to keep me alive, and somewhere across town, my older brother, the person I had trusted with my online banking password, just in case something happened to me, was transferring $43,000 into an account I didn't recognize. I didn't find out until 3 days later. And the way I found out wasn't from him. It was from my oncologist's billing coordinator, a woman named Helen, who called to tell me that my pre-authorized payment for the next round of treatment had bounced. That's how I found out my brother had stolen my cancer money. Let me back up. Because to understand what happened, you need to understand what my family looked like before I got sick. I'm 31 now. When I was 28, I was diagnosed with stage 2 Hodgkin's lymphoma. If you don't know what that is, it's a cancer of the lymphatic system. Highly treatable if caught early enough. My doctors were optimistic. I was terrified, but I had reason to hope. At the time of my diagnosis, I had been working for 6 years as a dental hygienist in Indianapolis. I wasn't rich, but I was careful with money, always had been. I had a solid emergency fund, a Roth IRA I'd been contributing to since I was 23, and a health savings account I'd been maxing out every year since I started working. I owned a small condo. I had a used Honda I'd paid off. On paper, I was the most financially stable person in my immediate family, which isn't saying a whole lot, but it's something. My family is just the 3 of us, me, my older brother, and our mom. Our dad left when I was 9. My brother is 4 years older than me, so he was 13 when Dad walked out, and I think that did something to him that it didn't do to me, though I couldn't have named it back then. He became the man of the house in his own mind, protective in ways that sometimes felt like control, resentful in ways that sometimes felt like love. Mom has had rheumatoid arthritis since her late 40s, and her mobility has gotten worse over the years. She lives in the same house we grew up in, about 20 minutes from my condo. My brother, who never moved more than 10 minutes away from her, had always positioned himself as her primary caretaker, her advocate, the one who handled things. It was a role he wore like a badge. When I got sick, my brother immediately inserted himself into every part of my medical situation. He came to appointments. He asked questions. He called doctors on my behalf. At first, I was grateful. I was scared. I was overwhelmed, and having someone take charge felt like relief. But looking back, I can see the shift that happened around month 4 of treatment. That's when I started noticing that the questions he asked at appointments were less about my care and more about what my insurance covered, what the out-of-pocket maximums were, whether I had a will, what would happen to my condo if I died. I thought he was being practical. I thought he was scared of losing me and processing it in a clinical, detached way, the same way he processed everything. I was an idiot. The reason I gave him my banking password was because I'd had a particularly brutal round of chemo in month 5. I was hospitalized for 4 days with neutropenic fever, which is when your immune system crashes so hard that a normal infection can kill you. I was genuinely scared that time. Not in the abstract, cancer is scary way, in the I might not wake up from this way. So when I was lying in that hospital bed running 103 fever, I told my brother where my passwords were written down, my email, my bank, my insurance portal. I told him where my will was, who my attorney was, what my wishes were. I needed someone to be able to handle things if I couldn't. He wrote everything down in his phone's notes app, right in front of me. 6 weeks later, while I was in a recliner at the infusion center with an IV in my arm, he used that information. The transfer happened in 4 separate transactions over about 90 minutes, which I later learned was deliberate. He kept each one under $10,000 to avoid automatic bank fraud flags. That detail, when I eventually found out about it, was the one that broke something in me permanently. This wasn't impulsive. He didn't panic and make a terrible decision in a moment of crisis. He researched how to do it. He planned it. He sat somewhere and Googled how to transfer money without triggering bank alerts, while his little sister was getting chemotherapy. The account the money went to turned out to be a joint account he had opened with his girlfriend about 3 months earlier. Her name was on it too. She knew. The $43,000 represented almost everything liquid I had, my emergency fund, about 8 months of carefully saved cash I had been building up, specifically as a treatment buffer. Because I knew I might not be able to work the whole time I was sick, and I needed to be able to cover my mortgage and my bills and my out-of-pocket medical costs without going into debt. When the billing coordinator called me and told me the payment had bounced, I thought it was a bank error. I pulled up my account on my phone right there in the infusion waiting room and just stared at the screen for a long time. Because the numbers didn't make sense to me. They didn't compute. There was no world in which that number was correct. I called the bank. They walked me through the transaction history. 4 transfers. 4 separate times he had logged in, typed in the amount, confirmed the transfer. I sat in the parking lot of the cancer center for 45 minutes. I didn't cry right away. I just sat there with my phone in my lap, thinking about the fact that I had given him that password in a hospital bed when I thought I might die, and he had saved it and waited. I called my attorney before I called the police. His name isn't important, but he'd been my family attorney for 3 years. I found him when I bought my condo, and I liked him enough to keep him on retainer. He told me to come in the next morning and not to contact my brother before then. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed and tried to think of any explanation that wasn't what it was. Maybe he was hiding the money from someone. Maybe he had a reason. Maybe there was something I didn't know. I ran through 100 scenarios, and every single one of them collapsed when I thought about the 4 separate transactions. Time to avoid fraud detection. My attorney filed a police report with me the next morning. The detective assigned to the case was methodical and calm in a way that I found genuinely steadying. She explained that this was a clear-cut case of financial elder and vulnerable adult fraud under Indiana law. Because I was a cancer patient who had granted him access specifically for emergency purposes, and he had exploited that access for personal gain. She said it was also potentially bank fraud given the structuring of the transactions. She asked me not to confront him. She said they'd contact him. I went home and stared at my walls. My brother called me 2 days later like nothing had happened. He asked how I was feeling, whether the last round had gone okay, whether I needed him to pick up any groceries. I sat there listening to his voice through the phone and kept my voice completely flat and said I was fine, I was tired, I'd call him later. I didn't call him later. The detective called me instead and told me they had interviewed him. He had initially denied everything, then claimed the transfer was for safekeeping because he was worried about my financial decisions while I was on medication. Then, when she showed him the bank records and pointed out the deliberate structuring of the transactions, he shifted to saying he'd meant to tell me that it was temporary, that he was going to put it back. None of the money was in that account anymore. He and his girlfriend had spent approximately $26,000 in the 7 weeks since the transfer. Car payment. Credit card debt. A week-long trip to Florida. The remaining $17,000 was still there. That detail, Florida, was when I finally cried. Not from sadness, from something I don't have a clean word for, a kind of awful clarity. Here is the thing about the legal process that I wish someone had explained to me earlier. It is slow, it is exhausting, and it will consume your life even when you are also trying to survive cancer. The 2 things running in parallel, chemotherapy and a felony case against my brother, was one of the harder things I've done. My oncologist was concerned about my stress levels. My therapist, who I'd started seeing 2 months into my diagnosis, became the most important person in my life during that stretch. My mom was devastated. That's the only word for it. She didn't defend him, which I had been afraid of. She just went quiet in a way that scared me more than anger would have. She called me every day for a week and mostly just said she was sorry. I didn't know what to do with her grief, on top of my own. My best friend, who I've known since college, stepped in so hard during this time that I still can't talk about it without getting emotional. She moved into my condo for 6 weeks. She drove me to treatments. She sat in the infusion center with me and brought me snacks and bad reality TV on her laptop. She handled my mail, paid my bills from my account once my attorney had helped me establish fraud protections, coordinated with my insurance company when appeals needed to be filed. She did all of this while working a full-time remote job. She slept on my couch and she never once made me feel like a burden. Meanwhile, my brother hired an attorney. His position became that he had a reasonable belief I had authorized the transfer, that I had been cognitively impaired by medication, and that he had acted in my best interest. It was an insulting argument, and it did not hold up to the bank records, which showed he had logged in from his own home IP address in a completely premeditated sequence. Here is the part I haven't told many people. About 2 weeks after the theft, before I even knew the full scope of what he'd done, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't pick up, but something made me. It was a woman. She introduced herself as an attorney, but not a criminal attorney. An estate attorney. She said she represented the estate of my father's mother, my paternal grandmother, who I had not seen since I was 11 years old, and who I had assumed, honestly, was already gone. She wasn't gone. She had died 4 months earlier, at 87, in a retirement community in Scottsdale, Arizona. And she had left me something. I need you to understand that I had almost no relationship with this woman. My paternal grandmother and my mother did not get along. When my dad left, his side of the family mostly disappeared too. I had vague memories of her, a tall woman, sharp-eyed, who smelled like gardenias and kept her house very cold. She had sent me birthday cards until I was about 14 and then stopped. I hadn't thought about her in years. What she left me was not a grand inheritance. It was a specific, targeted gift that she had amended into her will when she learned, through some channel I still don't fully understand, that I was sick. Somehow, through my dad maybe, or through someone who knew someone. Word had reached her in Scottsdale that her granddaughter in Indianapolis had lymphoma. She left me $60,000, designated specifically and in writing as a medical and recovery fund, with the instruction that it be released to me directly and that it could not be redirected, intercepted, or held by any family member on my behalf. Her attorney had structured it carefully. It went directly into an account in my name only, through a process that required my personal signature and ID, and it was released within 2 weeks of the call. I sat in that attorney's Zoom call and cried in a way I hadn't cried since my diagnosis. Not because of the money, though the money saved me. It covered the rest of my treatment. It covered the months I couldn't work. It kept my condo. I cried because a woman I barely remembered had seen what was coming for me before I did. She had put a wall around me before the wolves arrived. I have thought about her every single day since. The criminal case against my brother resolved about 8 months after the theft. He pleaded guilty to 1 count of fraud, his attorney negotiated it down from the initial charges, and was sentenced to 18 months of supervised probation, mandatory financial restitution, and community service hours. He was required to repay the full $43,000, and the court established a structured repayment plan because he obviously didn't have it. The restitution is ongoing. I receive a payment every month. I do not look at his name when I see the deposit. I just note that it arrived. As part of the plea agreement, a no-contact order was put in place. He is not to contact me directly, through third parties or through any digital communication. He has respected it as far as I know. My mom and I have a complicated, fragile, ongoing relationship. She chose not to take sides publicly, which I understand even though it hurt. She still loves him. He's her son. I've had to make peace with the fact that her love for me and her love for him can coexist, and that her failure to condemn him doesn't mean she endorses what he did. Some days I believe that more than others. I finished treatment 7 months ago. My last PET scan came back clear. My oncologist used the word remission in a way that made both of us smile at the same time. I went back to work 3 months ago, part-time at first, now full-time. My condo is still mine. My Honda still runs. My Roth IRA took a hit during the period I couldn't contribute, but I'm back to maxing it out. I see my therapist every 2 weeks instead of every week now, which feels like progress. My best friend flew out for my last scan results appointment even though I told her she didn't have to. She sat in the waiting room, and when I walked out and gave her a thumbs up, she made a noise loud enough that the receptionist looked over. We went to dinner that night at the nicest restaurant I could afford and talked about everything except cancer for 4 hours. There are things I've learned from this that I didn't want to learn. The first is that access is not the same as trust. Giving someone the tools to act on your behalf is not the same as them being trustworthy. I know this sounds obvious. It was not obvious to me when I was running a fever in a hospital bed and needed someone to be able to handle my affairs. But access and trustworthiness are completely separate things, and the gap between them is where the worst betrayals live. The second is that the people who perform caretaking loudly are not always the people who actually care for you. My brother showed up to every appointment. He asked questions. He called insurance companies. He built a whole identity around being my advocate, and then he stole from me while I was getting chemotherapy. My best friend, who built no identity around anything, just quietly showed up and slept on my couch. The third is about my grandmother. I've spent a lot of time thinking about why she structured her gift the way she did, the specific language about it not being interceptable, the direct release, the personal signature requirement. She knew. Maybe not about my brother specifically, but she knew that a sick woman with a complicated family needs her money protected from the people who love her. She had seen enough of the world to know that. And she acted on that knowledge quietly, years before it mattered, because she was someone who did things rather than just felt things. I got a letter from my dad after the story made its way to him. I don't know how, maybe through the estate process, maybe through my aunt. It was a short letter. He said he was sorry about what my brother had done. He said he was glad I was getting better. He said his mother had always talked about me. I read it 3 times and put it in a drawer. I don't know what to do with it yet. I might never know. That's okay. What I know is this. I am 31 years old, I have clear scans, I have my condo, and I have a best friend who will drive me to chemotherapy and bring bad TV to a cancer center and never once make me feel alone. Some people spend their whole lives without that. I almost lost it while it was happening. Not the condo, not the money, but the ability to see what was real. Illness and betrayal at the same time will do that to you. They both work the same way. They ask you to look very hard at what you thought was true and accept that it isn't. I looked. I accepted. I'm still here. And if you're watching this from somewhere you feel alone, in your family, in your circumstances, in some waiting room where you don't know what the results will say, I want you to know that the person who saves you is sometimes a woman you barely remember from childhood who smells like gardenias and keeps her house too cold. Sometimes help comes from the most unexpected direction. Keep your eyes open for it. I've thought a lot about what actually caused all of this, not just what my brother did, but the whole chain of events that led to where I am now. And the honest answer is that nothing happened by accident. Every outcome in this story, good and bad, was the direct result of choices people made, sometimes years before those choices mattered. My brother made his choices slowly, over a long time. He chose to write down that password. He chose to research the transaction limits. He chose to book a flight to Florida. Each one of those choices was small enough that he could probably tell himself it wasn't a real decision, that he was just thinking about it, just testing something, just temporarily borrowing. But that's how it works. You don't become someone who steals from their sick sister in one dramatic moment. You become that person in 100 quiet moments where you could have stopped and didn't. And my grandmother made her choices quietly too. I don't know exactly when she decided to add that protective language to her will. I don't know who told her I was sick, or what she felt when she found out. But at some point, she looked at the situation and thought ahead, not about what was happening, but about what could happen, and she acted on that thought. That's the thing that gets me when I think about her. It wasn't love as a feeling. It was love as a decision, made in advance when no one was watching. I think about that distinction a lot now. Feelings are easy. Everybody feels things. My brother probably felt love for me in some genuine sense, somewhere underneath everything else he felt. But feelings without action, without forethought, without the willingness to actually do something when it matters, that's not the version of love that protects anyone. What I've come to understand, not as a lesson someone taught me, but as something I had to live through to actually believe, is that character shows up in the quiet moments, not in the crisis. Anyone can say the right thing when you're watching them. The truth of who someone is lives in what they do when they think no one will notice. At midnight, with a laptop open, alone in a room, with access to someone else's savings and no immediate consequences. That's where my brother showed me who he was. And that's where my grandmother showed me who she was too. I'm not going to pretend that surviving all of this made me a better person in some clean, narrative way. I'm still angry sometimes. I still have moments where I think about that Florida trip and feel something I don't have a polite word for. Healing isn't a straight line and it doesn't come with a certificate at the end, but I do know that I came out of this with a clearer sense of what I want to be. What kind of person I want to be to the people in my life. I want to be the one who thinks ahead, who acts quietly, who doesn't wait for a crisis to prove I care. My best friend didn't need a lesson in any of this, she just showed up with snacks and slept on my couch for 6 weeks. I want to be more like her. I want to be someone who does things. If you've made it to the end of this story, I think you understand why it mattered to me to tell it. Not because I wanted sympathy, but because I think there are people watching this who are in the middle of their own version of it, sick, or broke, or betrayed, or just quietly wondering whether the people around them are actually who they seem to be. And I want you to know that clarity, even when it comes from the worst possible place, is still clarity. Knowing who is real and who isn't, that's not a loss, that's something to build on. I'm building on it, every day.